Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. This here is COSS Journeys episode 3. If it's your first time here, this is where we meet and we chat, very relaxed chat, with founders of commercial open source software or open source software and projects. And we dive a little bit into the journey of what it's like to actually start a open source company in this day and age. Also dive into some of the challenges that they have, where the inspiration comes from, and also where they learn everything that they know and everything that they do. This is a documentation based project. So over time, we will go back and we will re-meet and re-chat with the founders just to find out what things they've been doing new, what things have changed or worked successfully or not worked successfully, so that you have a better idea of what is actually involved in starting and founding an open source company. So today we actually have a great guest with us. We have Marc from Papermark.io. And Marc is someone who came on my radar a few months ago with some cool projects. And then quite a few people said to me, "Hey, Omar, you should reach out to Marc." And I reached out initially with another reason for other motives. But essentially, I started to witness Papermark grow from very early on. And recently, it had quite a few successful launches and quite a few successful kind of growth stages. So yeah, I'm super glad to have you here, Marc, and learn a little bit more about what you are doing and how you're doing it.
Thanks so much, Omar, for the intro. No, it's been really nice to chat with you over these past few months. I feel like it's been since the beginning of the journey with Papermark, really, that we got to talk more and more. And yeah, no, Papermark's doing well. I mean, we had our official launch in, I think, beginning of September. So it's been like, what, 2 months plus. Yeah, still lots and lots to do and more to come.
Hmm.
Um, but so far, I think it's been crazy. Like we got our first 1,000 stars on GitHub. I think that's always like the first 100 stars is like a big achievement. Um, especially if you, let's say, you don't have like a massive following or it's like your first project, kind of that you're publishing like fully open source from the beginning. From the
Mm.
first tweet, so to speak. And then, yeah, 1,000 stars is definitely something that was nice, but it was already not like that important anymore. Um, because you felt like, okay, you launched, there's like customers, people are using your product, and it's much more rewarding than, someone starring your project.
Mm.
I mean, I'm still checking every day though, so I think we're just shy of 1,300. So
Wow. Okay. So that's growing quite rapidly. Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know what star number I was. I like to star early projects. But yeah, it has been very interesting, and it's actually a very interesting thing that you mentioned that stars are a nice thing to have. They're a nice metric of sorts. But at the end of the day, having the users there using the stuff and I guess giving feedback as well and getting people to actually use the product, maybe that's where the more valuable reward and feedback kind of exists. That's where better validation exists. But talking about stars and stuff, I mean, before we get too deep, because I know that we missed this out last time and a lot of people were asking, let's have the TLDR of what Papermark is and what problem it's actually solving. Because this is where I think as well, you were in a very unique position to spot this issue. Like it's such a niche of a niche, like one of the original things is such a
true.
niche of a niche. And it's only possible to spot it from certain angles, i.e., well, we'll go into details. How about the TLDR, small introduction
Yeah,
for Papermark, and then we'll pick up from there.
100%. Yeah, so the Papermark is a document sharing platform that basically lets you share your documents and get real-time engagement analytics. just from a link. So when you go to Papermark, you upload your document, you get a link, you share it with your recipients who you want them to view your document, and you get a notification as well as real-time analytics, such as how long they stayed on a particular page, how often they viewed the document, and also at what time they viewed it, for example, from what browser, which location, all of this, whatever is important to you as a founder or an investor, a sales person. There's like tons and tons of use cases where you have a document that you would traditionally share with, like by email attachment or just send it over. You have no idea really, is it really being viewed?
Has it
And
arrived?
yeah,
Have they
with
checked
Papermark,
it? Like, did
yeah,
the guy check
exactly.
it at
It's
4
like,
a.m. when he was asleep and forgot to recheck it again?
yeah, exactly. And I think that's just the core use case is really just getting those real-time engagement from a particular document. But of course, and we can get into this later on, like I have like plans obviously for what it can be and where I want to take this. Just because I think there's a lot of use cases in our, when we're working, where documents are kind of the core to work, right? It's very central to our work. Whatever we're doing, it's always involves either editing, updating, reading, sharing a document, and oftentimes involves more than one person. So it's multiplayer, 100%. And we have very little insights into the meta layer of documents. So we know what the content is, that's great. And we know what the title is. But really, who is editing at what time, who has viewed it, who has not viewed it. If you're sending a document for review, for example, to your colleague, right now you probably do this in Google Docs or Microsoft Teams or Notion. You have no idea if your colleague actually viewed it unless they made changes into the document.
Yep.
So I think there is, to the whole work aspect, there's as a very interesting meta layer. But yeah, for now, the core focus is founders sharing pitch decks whenever they're fundraising and getting them really the best insights for their documents whenever they're sharing it with investors.
So it's very interesting that, like, overall the solution can be applied to many different document types and many different industries and many different roles, lots of things. Just anyone who wants to send a document and be able to track whether that document has been viewed by who, when, why, how and whatever. There's a lot of great use cases for that, but one that you've kind of essentially niched down on is founders sending their pitch decks. I think that's one of the ones that you're kind of carrying through a lot with your messaging right now. And I think you're not full time on Papermark, is that correct? Papermark, I think on your Twitter
Um,
bio you still say building at night or in the evenings or something.
yeah, so we're hacking away on Papermark, and I mean the team is extremely small, right? It's an open source project from the beginning. So we have really great contributors. I would have loved to track where all these amazing contributors come from. I think I'm counting like 12 contributors to the project right now, and yeah, it's incredible. So I feel like the, will spend more time on this project, and yeah, it's definitely something that has a lot of promise.
Okay.
So yeah,
But
this
I think part of your day job as well allowed you to spot this gap or spot this challenge and maybe have a closer experience with this kind of challenge and this kind of, I guess, a missing link, a missing a bit of data that's valuable to people. that they wish they have, and maybe you've even heard from people before, I wish I could see, or I wish I knew, and maybe you also said, I wish I could see and I wish I knew. So yeah, I think it's very interesting always to hear kind of the origin story of the ideas, because a lot of people think that ideas, you have to be really thinking deep and hard to come up with a random idea, and others think that sometimes the best ideas are just copy pasting what other people do. So I always like to
Yeah.
kind of like talk about the ideas a little bit. So your day job exposes you to many kind of communications and documents being sent around from founders to other people, and you spotted this gap, you spotted this niche. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And not just from founders, actually, but really from all types of, people or participants in the venture capital ecosystem. So with the fund of fund that you're mentioning, right, AQVC, it's it's a fund of fund, so it deals with both LPs and venture capital funds, and then venture capital funds trickle down to eventually founders and startups. And so we get to talk on a very high level with a lot of investors, what kinds of documents they're receiving from founders, and how they're dealing with it, and kind of like their problems, like seeing the problem from their perspective. And then on the other side, like the same problems that we had, or we have at AQVC, it's also that we're dealing with tons and tons of documents, not just not just maybe a single pitch deck, but also like different kinds of presentations, different variations. We're sending this to different groups of people, not just maybe an individual. So there is definitely a need for just a more holistic view on kind of like where your document is, as it's being shared around in the community.
Okay.
But yeah, like also from the investors that we talk to, I mean, documents have definitely taken on a different shape, I think, in 2023, or like 2020s, where before it was you know back in the day you printed out like all your like PowerPoint presentations on real paper and like handed it out like booklets. Then you started probably sharing this in attachments and emails and documents. I think since Notion has become really popular, documents are taking a form that is a bit more like a memo. So investors typically inside the organization, inside the in VC, inside the fund, whenever they're discussing a potential investment, they would typically write something like an investment memo, and it's a like a long form document that highlights a couple bullets why this particular partner or associate is excited about this venture, and then shares it with its partnership, and then they have an investment decision whether they should back the startup or not. I mean,
Okay.
and then these processes can be longer or shorter. So I've seen a lot of startups send around Notion docs just as a memo, and it's just a written document. It's less focused on slides. I think you're not so constrained to kind of like the four edges, because you have that like infinite canvas
Yeah.
that's making it a lot easier. Plus, you can still embed graphs, etc. So that's super interesting that we're observing as well, and where I think Papermark is also, or will be uniquely positioned to kind of provide founders an equal opportunity to kind of like share their, let's say, long form memos, and breaking out of that traditional, you know, rectangle shape of a presentation slide by
Okay.
slide. So yeah, that's
Death
something
by
that's coming
PowerPoint.
soon. So
Yeah, death by
Yeah,
PowerPoint has
exactly.
always been one of my pet peeves, but yeah,
I
that's
mean,
really interesting.
I'm not a slide guy myself, right? Like
Mm.
I'm very much an analytics guy. I like data, and I think a lot of the founders, technical founders, they too. I think that's why a lot of them opt for writing memos because it feels a bit more natural.
Yep.
It's not like writing code, obviously, but still, it feels like telling a story. And yeah, we all know the example presentations from YC with like Airbnb and Uber, and like they all sound great, but like I don't know. I don't believe that was the original presentation, to be honest.
I think in today's world where both individuals and organizations are moving to a more asynchronous way of communication, I think the presentation format no longer carries the same weight it used to. It doesn't have the same effect because the thing
Mm,
of a presentation was the creator of the presentation is there talking to you, and the slides are effectively just supportive material or just something to kind of highlight the key issues. And when you don't have that person sitting there presenting to you anymore, then you've essentially taken the backup meta information that is by itself not useful, and then people try to fill in a ton of stuff into slides, and then the slides just end up like somebody's random thought book, with just random stuff going on. And so yeah, I do agree that memos, simple document being shared around where there is the same language and style of communication of somebody giving a presentation, that's where then the message gets across a lot better. And that's why I said as well, death by PowerPoint. Death by PowerPoint is one of my, I've been in enough meetings, I've lost enough years of my life where the presentations are actually created and they state every single word. And while you are reading the presentation, the presenter is reading the presentation. And yes, uh, not the best, not the best thing in the world. But it's
yeah.
so it's a very interesting product and solution that you're building out here, which is essentially connecting the connecting the world of, and you said you're very analytical, connecting the world of kind of analytics and metrics and tracking to the documents that you send to get a better feedback on the stuff that you're sending, which is to me the equivalent of the old way of, if you're standing up and presenting to people in a room, looking at the people in the room and seeing their facial expressions, how they're actually reacting to the stuff. So that's super important, that you're kind of essentially digitalizing something that's been missing for the last few years in terms of sending presentations and sending information around. So that's super cool. Before we end up talking for hours about presentations and which one is best, Google versus Microsoft, you decided to build this and release it as open source, and that's an interesting point. What is your history with open source? Like, how did you get into open source? Is this your first big thing? What are the other things that you've done? Um, what is open source to you in your life, and why did you go for this with open source?
Yeah, great question. I think I also always love hearing people's story about open source and like how they got into it. Um, no, so open source, I think, goes back to kind of like the first hackathon that I attended. I just recently wrote like hackathons changed my life, but I mean, it wasn't about open source. I realized that much later on that it actually kind of everything I was doing was using open source and kind of like republishing and producing open source
Mm.
during these events. Um, but at the time, like hackathons were kind of like this creative outlet where, especially in cities in Europe, where the startup scene was not as thick and not
Mm-hmm.
as thriving. So there's a couple of hubs, obviously, with London, Berlin, that were thriving early on, Paris. and then other ones a bit more, not even rural, but just other cities that were dominated by traditional economies. And and hackathons were this outlet where all of a sudden all these like engineers would meet, and for a weekend they would build something together, and that was amazing. I just wanted to be part of that. Felt super liberating to ship product and not just build software in a way. But yeah, open source kind of like goes back to those early days, and then I had my first company in 2000, or I started my first company in 2016 with three of my friends, and we used a lot of open source while building kind of like out our product and also products for customers and clients. And I think at that time we still didn't realize that open source is the key. I think that came like 1 year later, where I think it was like I was working with a video conferencing solution. I had to host that on behalf of a education tech startup, and they were based out of Germany, and couldn't use Microsoft Teams or Zoom or any of the US based company solutions that would provide you video conferencing out of the box. And we needed to build something quick. And so for us, it was clear, okay, we need to see what like is something out there, is something that we can reuse. And we resorted to open source, and we found this project called Jitsi, and we're able to kind of like host our own version of Jitsi. It was just like a single server hosted version of Jitsi, integrated in our application, and we were up and running within like 2 weeks, and it felt like extremely powerful. And then we were kind of like iterating and improving on that hosting solution, and kind of contributing back to Jitsi some of the learnings that we did throughout that process. And yeah, then kind of like COVID hit, and was like the first lockdown in Germany. And at the time, then we had run Jitsi. That startup received like hundreds of thousands of new users every day, and we were kind of like trying to scale our Jitsi instance horizontally. It was still running on like one server. We spun up a second server and a third server, and it was all like extremely crazy because we couldn't use AWS at the time, so we didn't have auto scaling enabled. Like it was like a mess. We started writing obviously Terraform scripts, Ansible scripts. I think it was at the time, just to get things up like much faster. But yeah, at the end it turned out we had like in 1 month we ran like 1 million conferences through our system. And it was like multi-party conferences, right? So like between like 2 and 30 people typically. And yeah, I think we were like one of the largest Jitsi instances in Europe for sure, or privately hosted instances. So that was super exciting. And as we were contributing back, I mean, noticed that Jitsi was kind of like sponsored by this Spanish software house, primarily. So most of the engineers were kind of like hired there. And I was thinking about like, okay, how would monetization look like for Jitsi? How could they monetize it better instead of just not receiving any money for all the work that they've done, except like their salaries essentially, to work on this, because it was a really big product, and it still is. It's still going strong. And I was thinking a lot about this monetization part, and I it's like, you know it as well. Like it's a big project. A lot of people are working on trying to solve it and have different angles. And yeah, it's kind of like led me to like all these different like areas in open source, that are trying to kind of like help this ecosystem just become more sustainable, I think. I know a
Yeah.
lot of people will probably say, oh, it is like, it's sustainable, build a company. Like sometimes it's not possible to build a company around it. And because oftentimes you have very low level libraries
Yep.
that are used by millions of other packages. And it's just not possible to have that small little library become a company. It's just impossible.
Yeah, there's a lot
Like
of
that's the
challenges
fact.
that come along with that. And I think one of the other projects that you were working with, and maybe you can touch on that a little bit, is around the funding of these kind of open source libraries or open source kind of packages that wouldn't necessarily be able to become like a full-on company. Like it's not possible to go out and license a, I don't know, a date parser, for example, a date parsing library. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you could. No one's gonna buy it, but these projects also still require a significant amount of effort in order to maintain and in order to continue their growth and their development, as well as kind of ensure that they fulfill all of the modern standards and all the polyfills and everything else that's kind of required, etc. So I think you're okay with mentioning about the tea project.
Yeah, of
Not
course.
It's not a tea
Teas.
party for anyone else, but like give us an intro to tea and then like what you were kind of involved with. Maybe it will help people kind of understand a little bit more of where you're coming from with regards to funding.
Yeah, exactly. So, as I was thinking about kind of like how could Jitsi and other projects kind of like fund their way to open source sustainability without kind of like that bigger company attached to it. I was thinking a lot about open source projects maybe could, use some kind of like Web3 token or cryptocurrency, um, for the sole reason that it's divisible into very, very small amounts, and you don't need a intermediary to transact from one person to another. No one's gonna pay $1 per use or a cent per use for a particular package that you're
Yep.
using in npm. It's just absurd. It's too much. Like you will not sustain as a
Yep.
founder or as anyone's using it. Or and then at the same time, like it's very hard, as you can see with GitHub sponsors, or Patreon, to actually give people money in that. Open source is global. It's not in the US, it's not in Germany, it's not in France, and in the UK it's not in China. It's really everywhere in the world. So you need to cover a lot of tax jurisdictions. I think GitHub sponsors is trying to do that, and they slowly add more countries as they go. But it's also very intensive because you all of a sudden have a payment processor that that also needs to take fees. So this
Yep.
whole chain of like sending US dollars or euros is just not feasible. So hence the idea with kind of like embedding this in a Web3 protocol. And then I read about this white paper that came out from T, and kind of like opened my eyes because so T is a open source. Sorry, it's open source as well, but or eventually, it's a Web3 protocol that rewards open source projects, and it does so in a trickle down effect. So a package is not just code that they write. It's really made up of many, many libraries and dependencies that they have. And all of these dependencies, they have a certain weight in this whole network of dependency graphs. And so it trickles down whatever reward is being earned it will trickle down to all of their dependents. And I think this is like kind of like the game changer in this whole sustainability, because all of a sudden, let's say the very popular projects, right, the like that sit at the application layer that you know that you're installing with npm or with homebrew or with anything that you know of, they use maybe hundreds or 200s of other packages under the hood that you maybe not have heard of, but now they're also getting rewards, and I think this is really great. So yeah, this is a project that I'm supporting, and it's it's really exciting because they have a big launch coming up. Can't tell too much, but it's like early 2024 is kind of like where the testnet is launching. That's kind of like the staging environment for a Web3 protocol, and then later on the mainnet or production launch for that. And yeah, I think the biggest thing why it's also important is because it's backed by people who are open source maintainers and have been for many, many years. So Max Howell initiated the project. He's the creator of Homebrew, that probably a lot of engineers, maybe not all, maybe all engineers know that are
Yep.
using at least Mac OS. And yeah, so he kind of like conceptualized T and the T protocol and built a company around it to enable that. And yeah, it's super fascinating. I'm really bullish on T and what it will do to the open source ecosystem. And I think there will be those who create companies around particular open source projects. And then those who can't, they will have something like T that they can help in kind of like getting the rewards for their hard work, right? For being used in the market, for being used and building something useful.
Yep.
And I think this will be, I think it's exciting times ahead for open source, no matter where you are in kind of like the layer, on the application stack, whether you're very low level or whether you're like right at the application user layer. I think
Yep.
it's super exciting.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of major, I won't call it adoption or progress. There's a lot of growth across the board.
Yeah.
I don't have a software development background. I have a very strong technical background, but not in software development. But having kind of looked back through history, a lot more people are coming into open source, and I think in part that's because it's become a lot easier to kind of go and do stuff. There's a lot more information and knowledge around about how can I do that, and in general, kind of people are starting to feed back into the ecosystem that they have been kind of consuming from previously. And it's very
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned kind of the funding and sustainability of these projects, because that's essentially why commercial open source software exists. I would very much love to spend all my days just building stuff for free and just kind of giving it out. But at the end of the day, there's been a lot of great open source projects and libraries that have ended up kind of being archived or being unmaintained simply because there's there's no viable way for the lead maintainer or the team to maintain it, including their
Mhm.
normal life responsibilities. I don't think anyone in open source is kind of born with a golden spoon in their mouth and they have like $10 billion sitting in the bank and they're just like doing stuff for fun. Maybe there is. Kudos to that person, but yeah. So it's interesting that you mention all of this because Papermark so far is open source. And one thing that I always like to find out is where are you going to come here? Where are you going to draw the line between charging users for a feature versus
Mhm.
making something that is not open source. And by this, I mean it's very common for commercial open source projects to adopt the open core model, where 95% of features are available with the self-hostable edition. Some features maybe require a separate license, i.e., it's not fully open source, it's not under the same license. So, is that the approach that you decided to go with, or have you gone so far with everything is open and the paid or the online version is a paid service, for example? What's your thinking along those lines?
Yeah, also great question. So far, I've went with the easier way. I made everything open source and kind of like said, okay, this is for as a hosted solution, this is like non-essential. And if users would love to have this feature, then and they want it in an easy, digestible way, they would want to host it themselves, etc. Then they can pay a couple of euros for it or a couple of bucks. Yeah, that's how I went right now. And to be honest, I haven't really thought about kind of like creating an enterprise, folder within Papermark or anything like that. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that, to be honest.
That's fair.
Just because I think yeah, I like the approach that everything is kind of like out in the open, and that people who want to host it themselves and kind of like get around the like the payments. I think that's fine, and especially now. I mean, it's like been, like I said, a couple of months. It's not really where I feel like, I mean, I would be lying if I said, okay, you know, we know exactly what users want, and we know exactly, how much to charge them for, and how many enterprises have certain requirements that we would have to build into the system. I think it's a discovery process, and I think the easiest way is kind of like to, I mean, obviously give them the hosted version, but at the same time, the people who are actually self-hosting it, I mean, we have 100 forks plus or minus, a couple forks there. And I love seeing what other people kind of like build with it, right? Like, and I'm chatting with a couple of self-hosters as well, just to understand what their use cases are. And like, I totally get, I want to, they want to self-host it because they want to have control over it. And they're like very technical and good, and they can do that. And then there's others that are purely users, and they want to support open source, and so they're paying for it. And others, they want certain features, so they're paying for it. And others, they're like fine with the free version and they're using it. And so that's all great. So far, I think the real enterprise features will eventually come when there's a lot more, let's say, sensitive data, or when a lot more data is being kind of like ingested into Papermark. Then I definitely foresee, there's larger enterprises that say, I kind of don't want to upload all my documents onto your servers. What kind of like, I don't know, adapter, connector or whatever do you have, and like how you're transmitting data to your system, or what are you processing exactly. So that becomes a lot more critical for these larger enterprises, especially when we're talking about kind of like just internal documents as well. Right now, right, it's all about external documents, things that you're anyway sharing with third parties, even if they're trusted third parties, right, where you want to get insights, whether they've seen it or not, and how often they've seen it. But yeah, internal documents, I think, is a different story. And but yeah, it will be interesting to see if that's kind of like the path where kind of like Papermark goes. Yeah.
Yeah, It has been very interesting. I've seen a big mixture of some commercial open source software projects just essentially put the like this is only for an enterprise customer that they would need this. They put that under a different license. Things such as custom single sign-on or SAML or Okta integration, whatever these kind of authorization or what's the correct terminology? Not authorization. The kind of managing a lot of stuff managing the users, or some things where it's essentially the heavy analytics tools, an integration or an export for Tableau or Power BI or something like this, whereby it's only an enterprise who wants to come in and gather all of these crazy analytics about what everyone is doing in the tool, etc. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a very viable approach, and I think I always like to look around and see what everyone is kind of doing and seeing what levels of separation there are. Because sometimes that also inspires new ideas and new things. Like later on, you may decide, yeah, okay, we're going to do all the enterprise stuff a bit later on. We don't need to think about that for now. And everything so far is completely open source. And then it kind of gives you that flexibility without having to think about every feature like, hey, are we going to put this on the enterprise or are we going to put this under the open? Are we going to do this or are we going to do that? So yeah, I appreciate the simplicity of that, and in fact, it's kind of inspired a few thoughts for myself. So I need to take some time after this call to digest and think a little bit about that. But
What do
yeah,
you think though about the kind of like the enterprise folder? Like if we just dwell on this like for a moment, like I know people do this, and there's probably a good reason why. But like if you think about it, okay, like you put it under a different license because kind of like the work that you've put in to create this like custom adapter or whatever is so much that you don't want anyone to kind of like just pick it up and self-host it and like run with it.
yeah,
But like, are there really enterprises who gonna like take it and self-host it? Like in reality,
yes.
like maybe.
There would be. I was previously involved with an enterprise who
Okay.
did something like this. They were essentially a user, a customer of this. But also from the other side, having spoken with a few other founders, there are quite a few enterprises who would end up getting the enterprise self-hosting license because for them
Hmm,
it means that
got it.
like they want to self-host because they want it for data ownership, for security, for etc., to fit in with their own compliance, with their own databases, etc. And so they're willing to, they wouldn't become a normal SaaS customer, and so they
Hmm,
need these tools. And this is where then, it creates a kind of demand, versus supply kind of situation where they need these things, they need to integrate these stuff, and they're willing to pay for it. It's not like they're going to turn around and be like, no, a $25 billion company is not going to turn around and say, no, we're not going to pay $500 a year for a license to this open
got
source
it.
tool. And I think that also
Okay, but then
drives a
this all
little bit
makes
into
sense. Yeah.
yeah, it drives a little bit into sustainability. The second point is that quite often a lot of these features are kind of a necessity to close enterprise contracts or to close enterprise
Yeah.
deals. And so, in some cases, the open source company or even any software company may say, hey, we'll do this for you, we'll build this feature, but we'll charge you X fee and we'll charge you X amount of dollars for maintaining this and keeping it up to date and the security updates and making sure that it's compatible with all of the industry standards, etc. And so, from that point of view as well, 99% of your customers won't use this feature or may not use this item. But the 1% that will, they are the ones that maybe, they have the biggest contracts, they have the biggest whatever it is, or they are kind of the ones that you really want to maintain and keep on a good side. So, from both sides, there's like suitability to do this, where you draw the line, whether you draw the line just simply at, hey, it's enterprise only features, i.e., features only a large organization will ever use, or you even say, some projects have said, things like, oh, yeah, this advanced feature, you need to be on our paid plan for the SaaS. And if you self host, it's not available as well. You also have to go and get a license for it. And that's where, for each business, it kind of depends really on who your target self hoster is and what they need. I think it's very important to ensure that you don't provide a limited or crippled experience. You don't provide something that's kind of missing half of the stuff. In the
Yeah.
self-hosting, the self-hosting needs to be self-standing, self-sustainable on its own two legs, completely feature-rich as it would be for, again, the 90 something percent of use cases, 90 something percent of users. So yeah, that's my kind of thoughts and feelings on it, and what I've asked and learned from people so far. But yeah,
Yeah.
things may change over time. Maybe.
No, this makes a lot of sense, and like I definitely see that point, and kind of like that enterprise folder with a different license is then kind of like that little missing link that you're building, that it would be useless otherwise to the enterprise
Yeah. I mean, for me
if they
personally,
self-hosted it.
with Uninbox, I've put the Stripe integration under enterprise license, because for 99.9% of self-hosters, they just want to self-host with Uninbox, and just kind of get the email experience and use the stuff. They don't want to charge people for their service. And if you want to charge people for the service as a business, i.e., essentially taking what we're building and reselling it or rebranding it or
Yeah.
whatever, then that's a chargeable, licensable fee. So there's lots of ways that you can kind of like put in the boundaries, and like the boundaries are also never rigid. Like you can always kind of move something one way a little bit or another, so long as you don't suddenly say that all of your great features that were previously open source are now under a business source license or something else, and kind of
Yeah.
piss off half of the open source world or software world even. I think you'll be fine. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Uh,
good point.
Talking about time and pissing people off, we don't want to go too far over, because I know right now you're on the other side of the world from where you normally are. And so it's getting very late there. How about we have a demo of Papermark? And I think
Yeah, sure.
actually, yeah, I think there's a lot more stuff that we could definitely talk about for quite a few hours. But maybe it's better to do another time when you're on this side of the this side of the world. But yeah, let's jump into a demo of Papermark and kind of get an
Yeah,
idea of what
definitely.
it's about.
Yeah, I think the interface at least here still looks the same as it did when we launched. So it's like due for a kind of like a new look. But essentially, when you click into your document, so I've uploaded a document already. When you click into your document, you kind of see what links you have here, who's visited. Like I've visited this like twice just an hour before this call, just to see that,
Can you send me
like
that
kind of
link?
like get you some
I
data.
wanna do this live. Can you send me that
Yeah,
link?
of course. I'll send it to you.
Oh,
I
do you want me
think
to
there's
hide
a
your
chat
screen? Let me hide
here.
your screen for a second, and then tell me when it's safe to put your screen again.
Oh no, it's fine. How do I send you something? I think Discord.
Yeah, Discord actually. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
All right, and is it safe to look at your screen again?
Yeah, it's safe. It should be the same
Okay,
screen. I just
there
shared
we go.
this.
I moved it off in case anything popped up on the thing. So I'm gonna say here. Um, in fact, let me do this. So I'm
Can
gonna
share
give.
your screen as well, no? Otherwise
Yeah,
people will not see.
I'm gonna give the guest experience. So I got the link. I opened it up. It's asking for my email address, and I will say Omar at papermark.io. uh, so let's do that. Saying
Yeah, so
creating.
basically this
This is
yeah,
creating a new
so
user.
basically what this does is kind of like the link is editable, so you can kind of like create a either like no login or like no email required, or you can also
Ah,
make it a password required or set an
okay.
expiration date or anything else. Yeah.
Okay. So then this is then where, yeah. Okay. Cool. So then I would view the
Some of these
document.
stats are a bit outdated.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's kind of like the new viewer that you're checking out right now. So what happens when basically when I upload the document,
Right.
in the background, it triggers a, okay, let me just see this. Okay, I see your, you kind of like viewed the document, you viewed kind of like everything except the last page.
Oops.
Um,
Okay, and then you actually get like the time spent per page. So, okay, that's really interesting. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, a couple seconds here and there. I see when you viewed it essentially and how long and like together and like how much percentage. And then I see an aggregate, kind of like an aggregate average across all my views. And I can see also like if I have multiple links, I can see, who viewed it in a particular link. So yeah, if I create a link here, for example, we've got several options. So require password to view it, expiration date. We can set that. We can allow downloading the
Oh,
document as
interesting.
well, so that the user can actually download the PDF. I think that's always like nice to have. And then we can also add custom domains. I haven't configured one here yet. Should have done that for the demo, I guess. And then yeah, we also notify kind of like, in this case, I would have received an email that you viewed the document. A lot of people ask me like, can we turn these off? Like they're getting so many views that they actually want to turn off the notifications.
Yeah.
So we're actually working on a way to notify people kind of like in the application, instead of like just by email, because otherwise your email is like spammed with Papermark view notifications. But it's nice. It's a nice sign that people are using it.
Okay.
And yeah, you can upload different versions.
Ah, so there's also versioning.
And
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So you upload different versions. If I had like a second version, it would show like the new version would become automatically the latest that's under this link. But it will also be that you can pick which version essentially will be under a certain link, or you can
Yep.
freeze one version to a link, and then you will see different stats for different versions that you can toggle on and off essentially. So you can see how they compare one to one.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of cool things that are happening under the hood, that I can just quickly touch on. I know we're like running short, but basically, when you upload a document, what happens? So currently, we're using like Vercel Blob, which is just a one-to-one like API compatible integration of like AWS S3, but just on Cloudflare, on Cloudflare's file storage. And it makes it just like super easy. And that was also like kind of like the first dare that I can build everything with kind of like the Vercel kind of like ecosystem. But it's still super nice, and like the team is very supportive, and they're like very quick to answer. They're building it also open source, so it's very easy to kind of like get in touch with them. But yeah, when you upload that document, kind of like gets pushed to Vercel Blob, and then start a process in Trigger. So Trigger.dev is kind of like offloading a lot of longer processes. And what happens there? It's calling another API of mine, which is using a WASM implementation of MuPDF. MuPDF is like this very like rich PDF manipulator tool, that has like C bindings, like a JavaScript API, and then like obviously WASM as well. Um, and I was always looking for something WASM, and we talked about this in
Yeah.
private before. That
Yeah.
is like how I'm going to do this. Um, yeah, and it kicks off that process in Trigger, and like I was super happy that this all worked, how I imagined it. And yeah, Trigger works flawlessly. Um, and it
Talking
kind of
about
takes a couple
Trigger.
of minutes.
Trigger is another amazing project, and we're actually going to be having Eric on soon. We're just working out the
Nice,
right time
nice,
as well. But yeah, for those of you who are
amazing.
wondering, check out trigger.dev. It definitely has some cool stuff there. And yeah, so you've got quite a
Yeah,
bit of like magic going on behind the scenes. Like a lot of people would think this is
Yeah,
just like a
definitely.
simple like upload a file and then just view the file and done. And I think this is
Yeah,
one
it's
of those
not.
cases where you see people on Twitter or on Hacker News and they're like, okay, I can build this in 5 hours or in 1 hour or whatever it is. But so
Yeah.
you've got kind of your converting or transforming the documents that are uploaded as well and doing some kind of pre pre-processing, I guess maybe you would classify it as, or processing of the documents.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a processing step. So the problem is that, an individual like PDF document, like I want to get page by page analytics. So I need to be able to render each page and like by itself.
Yep.
And the fastest way to do that is kind of like converting it into images, um, because images are just like super native to the web. Like PDFs, you always need a renderer like to get PDFs running on the web in a browser. It's just not really natural. And yeah, so images are native to the web and makes it really easy to display them. You can manipulate them, like make them smaller and larger, and they scale like super fast. So that was a big step to convert them into images. And then, yeah, kind of like reading the individual analytics. I'm using Tinybird, which is using another open source project, ClickHouse, under the hood, which is extremely fast. And yeah, Tinybird's amazing. Met those folks in London, and yeah, I'm really bullish on Tinybird as well. So would anyone who's building anything with like data and they need fast reads and writes, go check out Tinybird as well. But that's basically how the the duration data and the view data is being sent to Tinybird and then read from Tinybird, kind of like in real time. Like, so you visited it and like I went there and it's like it just arrived. And yeah, so like two projects I really like and that kind of like have enabled Papermark to be three projects, right? Like, I mean, obviously the file uploading as well, but I mean, S3 is also so ubiquitous, so it could have also used that. But yeah, those three projects really enabled Papermark to be what it is right now. And I mean, there's a lot more that's coming. So I'm super excited about that.
Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic because next time we have a chat here, it'll be cool to catch up and see what exactly has changed, what exactly you've put in, what other cool secret stuff, well, not secret, but what other cool magical stuff you've kind of implemented in there. But
The great
yeah,
thing is nothing secret, you know.
that's the thing. It's all open source. There's
So
nothing
anyone,
secret. It's just magical.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, anyone
it's
can check it out. And I mean, it's like I'm learning a lot from other projects as well.
yeah,
Um, so that's a great thing, right? Like, how do you how do you get better? It's like, learn from others as well.
yeah,
So that's
definitely.
amazing.
Yeah, and that's kind of essentially why we're here as well. COSS Journeys is all about kind of discovering and learning and hopefully inspiring or kind of helping people to answer some questions about running an open source company, business, software, and kind of, yeah, that's why we're here. And that's why we'll probably have you back multiple times to kind of follow the journey along and see what's new and what's changed. But for now, we are out of time, unfortunately. So I'm going to definitely say a very big thank you to Marc. This was an epic episode. I'm really excited to have you here again, and also for our kind of chats that we have usually kind of on the side anyway. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you have any questions, you can reach Marc on Twitter or X at MFTS0. Every time I type that out, I start to type out something related to Microsoft. I don't know why. It just seems like a Microsoft acronym, but MFTS0. Reach out to Marc. Check out papermark.io as well for whenever you need to send your documents next. And if you are a COSS founder, then join the COSS Discord server on cos.fyi/d for Discord. And check out all the other episodes on YouTube, cos.fyi/j. Marc, thank you very much. And yeah, I'll catch you all soon. Bye.
Great.